Tonight, an attack on U.S. soldiers in Kuwait. Grenades are thrown into a command tent, wounding 14 Americans. And in a puzzling twist, the suspect is a fellow soldier.
Target Iraq, a Dateline special. Here now is Stone Phillips.
Good evening. A night of fast-moving developments in the war against Iraq. In Kuwait, near the border with Iraq, 14 U.S. soldiers with the 101st Airborne Division were injured in an attack in the middle of the night. Grenades thrown into a tent, and it looks like the work of one of their own. A fellow American soldier is now in custody. In Baghdad, where it's now Sunday morning, more powerful explosions. The city, the target of sporadic but relentless missile strikes and restrikes. Iraq is claiming more than 200 civilians have been wounded in the ongoing attacks. Iraq also insists tonight Saddam Hussein is alive, and as proof offered these pictures on Iraqi television today. The question is, when was this footage taken? Here at home, another day of massive anti-war protests in major cities across the country. A demonstration in New York City drew a crowd estimated at more than 150,000 people. Tom Brokaw and I will be bringing you up to date on all the latest information from the front. Let's get more now on that grenade attack. NBC's Dana Lewis is with the 101st Airborne Division in Kuwait. Dana?
Hi, Stone. As you say, it happened in the middle of the night. According to military officials, somebody walked into the Tactical Operations Center. That is a very large tent with several sections, and they tossed at least 2 grenades, possibly 3, and that there was small arms fire. We are now told by the spokesman, Major Trey Cate of the 101st Division at Camp Pennsylvania, where the incident took place, that a suspect is a soldier who was sought initially after the attack took place, and that he is now in custody. We do not know the exact motive for the attack, but there is a report from the camp that this soldier had been acting strangely for a couple of days, and that this brigade, which was supposed to be deploying into Iraq today and was supposed to be leaving today, that this soldier was not going to be allowed to go with them. So again, of the 14 people that were injured, 3 are in serious condition, and the injured had been airlifted to 2 different hospitals in theater. Back to you.
Dana, how will this affect this particular brigade's ability to go into battle? This was a command tent that was hit.
That's right, and senior commanders are all of them would be very necessary for an operation. The 1st Brigade is the 2nd brigade that is supposed to be going into Iraq. 1 left at about 48 hours ago. They're critical to this operation for the entire division, and we've been asking that question this morning and haven't received any answer. What will happen? The colonel on our base told me that it's very likely the operation will go forward, but of course it may be affected depending on the injuries. But we do know that some of the senior officers were in the Tactical Command Center at the time, so we hope to get that answered later on today, Stone.
Dana Lewis in Kuwait with the 101st. NBC's Ashley Banfield joins us from Fort Campbell, Kentucky, the home of the 101st. Ashley, good evening.
Just outside of the fort in Clarksville here, Stone, and I can just add a little bit to that report, and that is that officials here at the military post are suggesting that this incident today, quote, will not affect the mission of the 101st. I repeat, will not affect the mission of the 101st. That coming from a spokesman just some time ago. But let me just tell you that this community surrounding the post is going to be deeply affected by this news. There are 19,000 members who left this community to go overseas with the 101st Airborne Division, and that will make a very large impact on many of the people here. Mothers, fathers, brothers, all sorts of dependents left behind, and of course just this very supportive community. Just today, a rally on this very spot I'm standing of about 450 or so people calling out for people to honk in support of the troops, a pro-troops rally, if you will, with flags and posters and photos of their loved ones overseas. But that, of course, mood changed drastically when the news came that there'd been a grenade attack and that there'd been injuries. We happened to run into a few young women who had friends in Camp Pennsylvania. They were very concerned, getting on their cell phones right away, bursting into tears, calling to find out as much as they could about their friends overseas, not finding out any information as to whether they might have been some of the ones injured. We also had a chance this evening to survey some of the mood around the community, knowing now that it might just be possibly one of their own who did this, and the answer was shock. Have a listen.
The city and the post will be fine. Just as far as this individual member, they'll just have to put it behind them and move on, because that's what's important.
Very difficult time for so many of these people here, and they say that this will be the topic of conversation for days to come. I will let you know about the Family Readiness Group program here, Stone, and that is sort of a tree of information. Information comes from overseas to the military installation here. At that point, they disseminate information about casualties or dead to these family readiness groups. In this case, they will not be putting that information together until they have coalesced all of the details of these injuries. They will then pass it on to the families through the family readiness groups. Stone.
Ashley Banfield reporting tonight from Fort Campbell, Kentucky. Thanks, Ashley. There is late word tonight. It appears that the city of Basra has fallen and is now in the hands of coalition forces. Also tonight, a string of fresh explosions rocked Baghdad just before dawn, including one massive blast that shook the center of the city. NBC's Dennis Murphy reports now on another punishing day.
Cruise missiles thundered off tonight, destination Baghdad. That city is now being bombed around the clock. Sirens wailed as thumps were heard in the distance. Earlier today was the first daylight air raid on the city of 5 million. The plumes of black smoke on the skyline weren't the result of bombing. The Iraqis have set fire to trenches of oil around the city in an attempt to create a smoke screen, a crude tactic from the Middle Ages against satellite-guided weapons. The damage from the massive bombing Friday night is apparent. Charred palaces and ministries with gaping holes. Iraqi Information Ministry minders escorted Western journalists to a Baghdad hospital, where injured people were described as civilians. As in the first Gulf War, the Iraqi government is hoping pictures of wounded innocents allegedly caused by U.S. fire will fan international outrage against the U.S.-led coalition. In that vein, these provocative pictures, said to be civilians killed in the assault on the Iraqi city of Basra, are getting heavy airplay tonight throughout the Middle East on the influential Al Jazeera news service. U.S. warplanes are returning to their carriers and bases unscarred. Yesterday alone, the coalition launched 2,000 planes, fired off 500 cruise missiles. Consider this. There were 3 times more strikes on Baghdad in 10 minutes than strikes on that city during the entire First Gulf War.
The people are trying to kill us. I mean, they don't want us there. And so I was a little anxious. Yeah, I mean, I think you'd be a fool not to be afraid.
Coalition forces, meanwhile, encountered Iraqi artillery and machine gun fire in the southern city of Basra, the country's second largest. Tonight, the U.S.-led forces are backing off from Basra and moving north towards Baghdad. Military commanders say they don't choose to engage in bloody urban fighting for a secondary target. And it was another day of U.S. casualties. A Navy officer died along with British troops in the non-combat mid-air collision over water of 2 helicopters. These pictures of raging fires in southern Iraq are of 7 oil wells deliberately torched, the U.S. military says, by fleeing Iraqi soldiers. Dramatic as these images look, the people who do this kind of work say they'll be able to cap them in 30 to 45 days. The U.S. command says it is now in control of these fields that account for 50% of Iraq's production. Up north in the oil fields between Kirkuk and Mosul, Republican Guard units got hammered again today in a withering bomb attack. And as for the man in the coalition crosshair, Saddam Hussein, this picture of him chairing a meeting was shown on TV today in Iraq. Only the most gullible Iraqi would believe it's not the canned stock footage that U.S. officials say it most certainly is. Saddam's true status, dead, alive, wounded, remains a mystery.
And as you heard, around Basra in the south of Iraq, there has been heavy fighting for a city that is a key stop on the way to Baghdad. Reporter Keith Richburg with our NBC News partner, The Washington Post, is covering action in the area by the British Marines. Now back in the city of Safwan, he described his experience to NBC's Chris Hansen. And as you're about to see from the battlefield, the fighting was fierce.
We had received word earlier that, in fact, Basra was about to be taken, but it doesn't sound like that is, in fact, the case.
Well, that's exactly why I went up the road. I was taking the confidence of the Marines, and Basra was if not already taken, then close at hand. I was quite surprised. This kind of fierce battle was still going on.
How close, Keith, were you able to get to Basra today?
I was within about 10 kilometers of Basra. I pushed up the Basra Road, really behind Marines each time checking in. Could see very clearly well, the whole horizon was basically black with fires, which from what appeared to be the oil wells around Basra. At least 7 or 8 plumes of smoke, really blackening the entire horizon. And also, the Cobra helicopters were swooping in very low over our position and going straight at Basra, striking targets with their missiles.
Have you been able to get a sense for casualties on the Iraqi side?
I was on that road going from the border straight up to Basra, and I counted several burned out, abandoned vehicles. Inside with the skeletal remains, the burned remains of one Iraqi soldier. They took a beating going up that road.
Have you been able to determine why this fierce resistance?
I think what happened was maybe a lot of us had psyched ourselves into thinking this would be like the last Gulf War when the Iraqi side would not fight. The surprise, I think, is that they have stood and fought.
Just because Basra may be falling, it's still a very dangerous operation.
There's also the danger, I think, of anarchy and chaos. Well, there's no one in control. There's no police on the street. There's just a lot of men milling around on the streets.
NBC's Kerry Sanders is with the 2nd Battalion of the 8th Marines pushing north from Basra. We just heard that report from Keith Fritchberg of the Washington Post. Kerry, what do you have for us tonight?
Well, the 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines are sort of coming up from the west, but as they're coming up from the west, to the east in Basra, there is a highway, which is Highway 8, and on the outskirts of Basra, many of the Iraqi soldiers decided to take a hike and just abandon their positions. So they started heading up Highway 8, heading to Al-Nasiriyah. Now, on the way up there, they were intercepted by some Marines from the 1st Battalion, 10th Marines. That's an artillery unit. There had been some indirect fire in the area, and they saw a group of men moving down this Highway 8, most of them on foot. So they intercepted them, and they took them into custody, enemy prisoners of war, a total count of 51. They did not find any weapons on them. They did have actually some ammunition on them, rounds for AK-47s. So the men were all separated, placed into a holding area, and that's when the 2nd Battalion, 8th Marines were called in. Fox Company came in and began taking them into custody. They were able to ask them only a few questions out at the scene. Among the questions is where were they and what were they doing? They claimed, according to one of the enemy prisoners of war, that he said he was sort of the leader, claimed that they were a special forces unit and that their responsibility was to hold an oil refinery facility outside Basra, just on the western edge. And as they saw the 1st Marine Division involved in the invasion and the attack there in Basra, they decided to hightail it out of there, and so they started walking and running up the road, and that's when they were taken into custody, as I said, by the Marines who were with the artillery unit. Tom?
Thanks very much. NBC's Kerry Sanders, one of the embedded journalists traveling with the Marines. And joining us now by phone from Baghdad is Peter Arnett, reporting for National Geographic Explorer, MSNBC, and NBC News. Peter, what can you tell us about the scene there as it is early Sunday morning in the Iraqi capital?
Well, Tom, indeed, it is around-the-clock bombing of Baghdad, but it's really intermittent. In fact, the last missile attack 4 came in an hour and 40 minutes ago. Since then, absolute quiet. Now, it was mentioned in an earlier report that the Iraqis are trying to play up the fact of casualties, and in fact, at 11 o'clock this evening, our producer, Charles Poe, did go in a 2-bus convoy with a lot of other journalists to a location in West Baghdad where the Iraqis said 7 civilian houses had been destroyed, and Poe did see a huge crater in the ground, Tom, and was showing around the wreckage of these houses. There was no figure given on casualties, but that was the latest trip by the media, Tom, a few hours ago in Baghdad. Back to you.
And what about Iraqi television? Are you seeing anything on that tonight, overnight?
Nothing other than those continuing pictures of Saddam Hussein meeting with his son and other officials. I think it's interesting in that particular picture that his son is in a civilian suit, whereas, most even announcers on television these days are in uniforms, Tom.
Which will only raise suspicions that it's outdated video. Thanks very much. Peter Arnett tonight, once again, bravely reporting from downtown Baghdad. NBC Jim Miklashevsky joining us now live from the Pentagon. Jim?
Tom, if it seemed quieter for Peter Arnett there in the capital of Baghdad today, it's because shock and awe shifted somewhat and was downgraded today. There were only 500 weapons dropped throughout the entire country on various Iraqi military targets. That's about 1/3 of the weapons that dropped yesterday in that devastating display and bombardment we saw over Baghdad. Also tonight, U.S. military officials reporting that American ground troops are edging ever closer to Baghdad. They're only 100 miles away tonight, and they're probably going to have to pause before they get there because much of the bombing campaign today was aimed at those Republican Guard forces, 6 divisions of heavily armed forces, tank divisions around Baghdad, and it's not clear that bombing campaign has actually done its job yet, and that is to knock down those divisions a peg or two to make it much easier for those ground forces to get close. And in the Battle of Basra that Kerry Sanders was talking about a moment ago, General Tommy Franks in his briefing indicated that if those Iraqi troops continue to remain dug into portions of Basra, the U.S. military, for the time being, would allow them to stay there for 2 reasons. One, they don't want to get drawn into the city and potentially very dangerous combat, but also there's the problem of collateral damage and civilian casualties. So the feeling is that they can leave those Iraqi troops inside Baghdad, and as the rest of the war unfolds, they'll eventually be forced to surrender. Tom?
An Australian cameraman was killed today when a car bomb exploded at a checkpoint in northern Iraq. And in the south, other journalists from our NBC News partner Britain's ITN came under fire. Tonight, 3 are missing. John Hockenberry has been listening to voices from Iraq on the front lines.
On the unstable ground of a real battlefield, anything can happen.
There was a strange dynamic. It was just, the air didn't smell right.
Journalist Carl Vick of the Washington Post at a checkpoint in northern Iraq.
I turned to my colleague in the next seat and said, they do suicide bombings.
The answer to Vick's question came quickly today.
And right as the words left my mouth, there was a massive blast behind us, maybe 40, 50 yards. Blew a window out of our car, and I turned around and saw a fireball after I got my head out from between my knees.
The bomb, apparently meant for the reporters, killed at least 5 people, including an Australian cameraman. In the south, near Basra, what looks like victory to the generals has a quite different feel to the reporters out on their own.
What's typified this war so far has been just a general collapse in the south of Iraqi forces with very fierce pockets of resistance, and you don't know where those pockets are.
Dexter Filkins of the New York Times is not embedded with any troops. He says he feels vulnerable, just like some ITN reporters who came under fire, 3 of whom went missing today, not far from him.
You think you're being careful, and you're walking right into the middle of something really terrible, and my heart goes out to all those guys today.
Reporters who are traveling with U.S. forces observe combat from behind an armored shield, moving ever forward.
We saw some very heavy artillery shelling going on, and at least one very large explosion in the air.
NBC producer Tim Eulinger, near the town of Safwan with the 6th Transport Battalion, witnessed a battle for an airfield.
There was a battle being waged for control of a very crucial airfield, which is within a few miles of here. And that airfield is going to be the giant supply base for the major push into Baghdad.
The battle for Baghdad. The last one took place in the year 1401. Then the city fell to horsemen with swords. This time the fighting will look different, and it will be televised.
The scene out here tonight, it is absolutely awe-inspiring. There are literally thousands of vehicles in formation behind us. You can see headlights as far as the eye can see.
John Hockenberry's report tonight. One of the colleagues of those 3 missing journalists working for British television managed to make it back to safety, but he's been unable to discover the fate of his colleagues. Details of his ordeal tonight in his own words.
We saw tanks burning, we saw trucks burning, Iraqi trucks, helmets, lots of signs of heavy fighting from probably last night. And we drive a bit further on the road, and then there's a bridge, and almost when we got to the bridge, we saw some Iraqi soldiers coming towards our direction. They were still carrying weapons, and so I thought it was a better idea to do a U-turn and turn back straight away. So that's what we did. We turned back. We were in two vehicles. I was driving the first vehicle with my correspondent, Terry Lloyd, and driving back, I could see in the mirror that there was actually two Iraqi vehicles following us, and this happened only on a couple of miles distance, actually. And they overtook us that same moment. Very heavy gunfire started towards my car from the right-hand side. And I had to duck down straight away. Windows were exploding. Everything exploded inside the car. A split second, I looked to the right, and the right door where my correspondent was open, and he was not there anymore. It took fire, and I jumped out, went in a ditch, and then the car blew up.
Dan de Mostier tonight describing what happened to that ITN crew. Trouble today in northern Iraq as well. NBC's Fred Francis is there tonight for us. Fred?
You know, the Australian cameraman was filming the aftermath of a horrific raid last night on Al-Ansar Islam, some radical fundamentalists who are near the town of Sulaymaniyah there, are very close to the Iranian border. The fighting was minimal today, but because the U.S. carpet bombing last night, or a cruise missile bombing of Al-Ansar, was so fierce, a couple of times in the last few weeks, and here's that bombing last night, a couple of times in the last few weeks after attacks, suicide bombers have come down into the city near where I am, near Halabja. And today, a suicide bomber in retaliation for this bombing last night blew himself up and took out Paul Moran, an Australian cameraman. And you know, everybody here is very cautious, Tom, but this is, after all, a war zone.
All right, thanks very much, Fred Francis, tonight in the always volatile part of northern Iraq, where the Turks, the Kurds, the Shia, and the Sunnis all come together, and they rarely get along. In his first briefing since the war began, the Allied Commander General Tommy Franks promised an unprecedented campaign of power and, as he put it, flexibility. During that briefing today, we also got a rare look at the role of special operations in the opening hours of the war. Brian Williams learned more from NBC analyst General Wayne Downing, who was Special Operations Commander during the last Gulf War.
Special operations attack strategic targets or targets of operational value in a way that no other weapon systems can attack them. And they'll do things that you can't do with a cruise missile or an F-117 with a 2,000-pound bomb.
They are the soldiers of the Special Operations, Special Ops, and retired four-star General Wayne Downing knows what a valuable tool they are. Among their many roles, preparation of the battlefield, helping U.S. forces to launch attacks.
We see what comes in from the sky. Is there a special ops role in the sky, on the ground here?
There could be. I don't know how we hit that compound the other day of leadership, but it could have been a variety of means. You know, it could have been us just watching who went in, who went out. But the other thing that it could have been a street sweeper who's been sweeping that street for the last 12 months. And he's not a street sweeper. And he's somebody who works for us, or maybe one of us.
But if Special Ops forces help attack, they can also help prevent attacks. In this case, hunting down weapons Saddam Hussein might use before he gets to fire them.
How about what's been a real problem here in Kuwait City, the Scuds, the smaller missiles?
The special operations guys are all over the Scud problem. They're out there in the western desert right now. I suspect that some of the pictures that General Frank showed today of these helicopter gunships attacking these border positions, these were special operations gunships.
The spooky part of this war and the elusive part of this war, weapons of mass destruction. What can special forces contribute on that front?
I am sure the special operations guys are actively looking for these things on the ground. If they find them, the special operations guys have special teams who are trained. It takes years of training to go in and neutralize these weapons
Downing says the men of Special Ops will stop at nothing to get the job done. He says they would give their lives and take others just as quickly.
Isn't it true that sometimes they do things that Americans don't like to always think about? In one shot, we have a U.S. Navy SEAL sharpening a combat knife. He wasn't going to go fishing.
It's the reality of what combat is and what war is. This is up close and personal. It takes a certain psychology to take a knife and kill another man, but yet these people have that capability.
As great a role as Special Ops are playing here, Downing says we will probably never know the full extent of what some are already calling the secret war in Iraq.
Much of what they do is never going to come out, and quite frankly, that's the way you really want it. I mean, you don't want the enemy or potential enemies to know what you can do and how you can do it.
Brian Williams tonight with General Wayne Downing. Now, a late report from NBC's David Bloom, who's traveling with the 2nd Brigade, 3rd Infantry Division, moving toward Baghdad.
What we're doing right now is we're stopped because we've been stopping from time to time to do what they call hot refuels or hot fuels hot stops, which basically allows us to have the tankers, which go through the most fuel. They go through about, they're very poor fuel economy, about 7.5 miles to the gallon. So they need a lot of fuel, and they do these hot stops with the 2,500-gallon refueling tankers, which allows them to quickly refuel and then press on to the next major refueling stop, which is still a ways down the road. We've had 2 of these major refueling stops that last for several hours, and then at other times we do these hot refuels. At any rate, you can see, if you can, off in the distance, what a long column this is. We're still going white lights, which means that they're not worried about the possibility of Iraqi airstrikes, because obviously the American warplanes control the skies, and it's much safer for them to travel at night by light if it's indeed safe to do so, and they're not worried about Iraqi forces, which by and large are not at this stage. They're moving again toward the north, where the Republican Guard with their tank divisions and then the Special Republican Guard encircle Baghdad, and this is, as they say, the Iron Fist, which is likely to take on those soldiers if they don't capitulate.
David Bloom still on the move with the 3rd Infantry. Now Stone Phillips with more on the campaign for Baghdad. Stone?
Tom, we heard General Tommy Franks today say so far there have been no big surprises. But he and President Bush in his weekly radio address both cautioned that this war may be longer and more difficult than many expected. NBC military analyst William Arkin tonight on the effects of American air power, U.S. strategy on the ground, and the hard reality that as much success as U.S. forces have enjoyed so far, the stern tests are still ahead. Can we assess the effectiveness of the bombing so far?
Yes, we can see the Council of Ministers building on flames. We can see the daylight pictures of the Republican Palace today, which is very impressive. We can see that attacks are continuing to mount in the area around the Saddam International Airport. Unfortunately, all we have is a tiny slice of interior Baghdad. We don't know what's going on in the city at large. We don't know what's happening to those massive defenses on the outskirts of the city.
Let's talk about the move to Baghdad. Is there a danger in overestimating the speed with which we have moved?
Look, we've known from the beginning that the Iraqis have collapsed all of their defenses around the capital. They haven't mobilized their forces outside. The good news is that we are making good time into Iraqi territory. The bad news is that not one American or British soldier has seen a Republican Guardsman yet. We don't have a clue about what the defenses of Baghdad are really going to be like, or how much destruction is going to take in order to finally end the regime.
Well, it's almost certainly bristling with Republican Guard, and always the question, what if they're in a civilian part of the city?
Today we saw really the first evidence of any kind of casualties as a result of the bombing campaign. So we know that as this progresses, there are going to be civilian casualties. There is going to be damage to civilian structures in Iraq. That's the nature of war.
What's the significance of what we've seen today in and around Basra?
Patience. We know that the regular army is evacuating the city. People are throwing down their arms. We know that only the security apparatus is in charge of this place. So today, in fact, what we've seen is the psychological warfare campaign and this patient move forward hoping that Basra and Baghdad are going to fall without that final battle in the streets.
Continued speculation tonight about Saddam Hussein.
Stone, you know, we heard Saddam Hussein was injured, somebody in his family was killed, Saddam was killed, Chemical Ali was killed. Look, the reality is we have no idea.
General Frank said as much today in the briefing. We don't know.
What we do know is that we've certainly robbed Saddam Hussein of his normal places of business, his normal residences. We're slowly chipping away at that apparatus that secures him. If you imagine President Bush going from the White House to Camp David without his helicopters and without his Secret Service protection and without his handlers and his advance men, now we have Saddam Hussein who's getting more and more in the same situation. The more that Saddam Hussein gets isolated, it seems to me, the more vulnerable he is. That is exactly the American plan.
How close is the main U.S.-led invasion force to Baghdad? Arkin believes it could be 3 days before it reaches the outskirts of the Iraqi capital. One other note on the enormous cost of this war. Arkin says based on the number of weapons used, the price tag for yesterday's bombing of Baghdad, at least $500 million, and probably considerably more. Tom?
Thanks very much, Stone Phillips. The video of Saddam Hussein on television today, and again, there is a great doubt that it was from today, just part of an Iraqi campaign to assure the people there that the regime still is in power. But anyone who watched Iraqi television also may have gotten a hint that change could be coming. Here's Dawn Fratangelo.
The difference in the pictures couldn't be more dramatic. Iraqi television, Western TV.
Saturday, March 22nd.
The residents could see and feel the devastation of coalition bombs falling in Baghdad. You'd never know it from the 2 government-run channels and their Saturday lineup of must-see TV. Familiar images of Iraq's biggest star of the small screen. A proud Saddam on horseback, a defiant Saddam firing his rifle, a devout Saddam in prayer. But who's fooling who?
The government itself is in denial. It's pretending none of this is happening.
Sharif Ali is chairman of the Iraqi National Congress based in London.
What they want to do is to pretend that they're going to win, and this is what they did in 91. They still continue to say that 91 was a victory for Saddam.
On television?
On television, everywhere. So at all times they must show that they are in total control and that they are going to win.
Iraqi TV did go a few occasions over the past 24 hours. Just a tiny crack in the relentless flow of propaganda, but maybe enough to send a subtle message to Iraqis.
Well, it's saying that the government is losing its grip. It's very important for them to see that the government is losing its grip.
While there is little on television that could pass as news, earlier today Iraqi TV did broadcast images of people injured. Footage Sharif Ali believes is authentic, but also believes the government is using it to suggest coalition forces are targeting civilians. There were also pictures of Saddam and one of his sons, the Iraqi TV announcer claiming they were videotaped today. The U.S. is not so sure. With telephone lines still open and word of mouth spreading the devastation of Saddam Hussein's power base, many Iraqis know a different reality than the one beaming from their televisions.
When they see Saddam Hussein and file footage of him holding a rifle, what are they thinking? Do they think that he's still alive?
These images don't mean anything to them because they're old and they see them countless times every day. But they probably still believe that he's alive but hope that he's dead.
They hope that he's dead.
Oh, absolutely. No.
The majority of people.
Oh, without doubt. Even at the highest level. Everybody hates him, including his close circle.
Andrea Mitchell joins us now from the State Department, and she has been tracking as well American officials who are trying to keep track of Saddam Hussein, dead or alive, on television or not. Andrea, who besides the ultimate leader, Saddam Hussein, are they after in Iraq?
One of the most wanted men as a war criminal is Ali Hassan al-Majid. He is known not very affectionately as Chemical Ali because he is responsible for the deaths of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of men and women and children from chemical attacks against the Kurds and against the Marsh Arabs over the past dozen years. He apparently has survived, contrary to reports earlier on other networks that he had been found dead. In fact, he survived and was in Nasiriyah at the time of the bombing of the Saddam Hussein family compound. He was not at that leadership meeting. He's now on the lam, and U.S. officials are hot on his trail. They want him very bad.
And Andrea, what about this news that we've gotten out of Iraq that Naji Sabri, the foreign minister, a former, quote, journalist in Iraq who lost, I think, both an uncle and a brother to the Saddam regime, but still hasn't been an apologist for it, that he's going to the Arab summit. Could there be more to that meeting than what we're hearing about?
It's very hard to tell because he's arrived in Damascus tonight. He's going to Cairo for the Arab summit meeting. He is not believed carrying a message of surrender. He's not in the inner circle, so it's very hard to read him. He was very tough in his statements on arrival tonight in Damascus, but it remains to be seen what he will hear from the Egyptians and others at the Arab summit, because it is very certain that other members of the Arab world want very much to see an end to this.
Finally, do they know at all in the inner circles of the Bush administration whether Saddam Hussein is alive?
They don't. They say they are mystified, and it's not surprising that they would be. They know he was at that compound. They don't know if he survived.
All right, thanks very much, NBC's Andrea Mitchell tonight. President Bush is enjoying a wartime bounce in the polls. A New York Times poll found that 70% of the Americans now approve of how he's handling the war, but that support is strongly divided along partisan lines. While 93% of Republicans approve of the president's Iraq policy, only 50% of Democrats do. Here at home and overseas, those who don't support the war are making their voices heard loud and clear. Here's John Larson.
Opponents of the war are still a minority in this country, but today they showed they are a large minority and a loud one. In New York City, tens of thousands marched down Broadway. Many were not so much anti-war as they were against this war.
This one just doesn't feel right.
I was fine with Afghanistan if they were attacking us. Iraq isn't.
This veterinarian is also a Korean War veteran.
You don't feel like the president really made his case?
Absolutely not.
That it was somehow connected to 9/11? Or...
Absolutely not. They tried hard to connect it, and it didn't work.
There were anti-war protests in about a dozen U.S. cities today.
U.S. off Iraqi soil! USA!
But also counter-demonstrators who came out to show support for U.S. troops and President Bush.
We are behind him 110%. And if there's anything that we can do for our president and our country, we will do it.
Overseas, large anti-war demonstrators and small acts of civil disobedience in countries whose governments support the U.S., but whose citizens, polls now show, overwhelmingly oppose the war. In England, in Spain, and in Italy, critics came out in force today.
As widespread and as vocal as the demonstrations were in the United States and among its allies, Homeland Security officials may have had more reason to be concerned about the protests taking place in the Middle East.
The concern that protests are further inflaming anti-American sentiment in the Arab world. In the small kingdom of Bahrain, home to the U.S. Navy's Fifth Fleet, about 200 demonstrators gathered near the U.S. Embassy chanting "Death to America" and "Death to Israel." And in Amman, Jordan, about 5,000 gathered in the courtyard of a mosque. Though demonstrations are normally tightly controlled in Jordan, this one quickly veered out of control. Police responded with dozens of canisters of tear gas. Back in the U.S., the protests were largely peaceful. Protesters here say they fear the war will lead to more anti-American anger and more violence down the road.
Well, those who turned out in America today and around the world to protest against the war far outnumber those who were in favor of the war in their demonstrations. There were some of those activities today as well. In Kentucky, about 400 military wives, veterans, and others gathered and declared solidarity with the U.S. troops. In Chicago, pro-war demonstrators came within 20 feet of peace activists outside a federal building. There were other rallies today in support of Operation Iraqi Freedom in Sacramento, California, Tennessee, Michigan, also in Indiana. New images tonight of a bombing in southern Iraq from a perspective that you might recognize from the first Gulf War. Dramatic video showing missiles hitting their targets, taken by the actual aircraft firing them. 12 years ago, every day of the war seemed to bring new images from these gun cameras. But in this conflict, as Rob Stafford reports, those pictures may be fading.
After a television barrage of fireballs and huge clouds of smoke, the military today showed an oddly familiar image of war. They're the grainy black and white pictures from the gun cam, silently depicting how accurate an aerial attack can be.
This video shows an attack against an Ababil 100 in southern Iraq. Our second focus, you will see two clips. The first is an outpost along the border, and the second is a building that supported observers on the border.
The missiles hone in on the target with dogged precision. And finally, another image.
Now, this is a patrol boat being attacked from the air, and in a moment you'll see the secondary explosion completing its destruction.
The images are impressive, but James Dunnigan, editor of StrategyPage.com, says pictures didn't tell the whole story during the first Gulf War.
In '91, were the bombs as precise as the videotape led us to believe?
The bombs you saw on videotape, which were the 8% of the bombs, yes. Not 100%, you know, the Air Force admits that, but they got apparently 90%, a little over.
Now the government says its accuracy rate will be much better because it's using more precision bombs and missiles than ever before. But if the military seems eager to show how straight it can shoot with the use of compelling video, why weren't any gun camera pictures shown of the raid on the Iraqi capital? General Barry McCaffrey is an analyst for NBC News.
Why aren't we seeing close-up shots of those strikes inside Baghdad?
There isn't a camera in the nose of a Tomahawk missile or an air-launched cruise missile.
That's because the missiles used in the air raid on Baghdad, JDAMs and Tomahawks, are guided not by man, but by satellite global positioning systems. There's no need for a human eye to guide them, no need for a camera, and thus no video.
I mean, with Tomahawk missiles, we're literally dialing up the corner of the building, or in some cases, the window you want to fly the missile through. And that's at a range of 600 miles from some submarine below water that's launching the thing.
These images were considered state-of-the-art in the first Gulf War. So as satellite guidance technology advances, there's a good chance they may soon be considered antique, the cockpit view becoming a thing of the past.
One reason the Pentagon wanted to get these latest gun cam pictures out is to show the Iraqi military just how outgunned they are. It's part of a strategy to put psychological pressure on the Iraqis in an effort to get them to surrender. It might be working, and there may be a good reason for that. In typical military fashion, the Pentagon is leaving nothing to chance, including PSYOPs. Again, John Larson.
All I know is that the liberation of Iraq is underway.
That the Iraqi people want to be liberated.
The people you liberate will witness the honorable and decent spirit of the American military.
If it seems U.S. leaders are all reading from the same script,
do not fight for a dying regime.
Of a dying regime.
Or a doomed regime.
It may be that they are, and it may be that their intended audience is not the American people at all.
Good morning.
This isn't so much for the American public. This is for the Iraqi people.
Absolutely.
NBC analyst, retired Admiral Dennis McGinn.
The idea is to convey, we know the outcome is inevitable, that further resistance is futile, and also it is almost like self-inflicted pain to save their lives by laying down their arms.
Welcome to the new battlefield.
Yes, yes.
Psychological operations and a plan predicted months before the war even started. In this paper, written by an analyst at RAND Corporation, a think tank that advises the government. The paper made it very clear that if the United States was going to have the kind of war that it hoped for, a quick war with minimal casualties on both sides, that it depended in part on whether the Iraqi military decided to fight. In other words, the battle to influence how Iraqis were thinking could mean the difference between light casualties or a tremendous loss of life. The first salvo in the psychological war? Make sure the Iraqis hear a drumbeat of words from the top. Words that, quote, depict the defeat as inevitable.
It is now inevitable that there will be a change.
The regime is history. The tyrant will soon be gone.
Another phase of the psychological war? Provide assurances to the Iraqi people that this is not a war of conquest, not a war for their oil or their land.
We have no ambition in Iraq except to remove a threat and restore control of that country to its own people.
Iraq belongs to the Iraqi people. The government of Iraq must be run by Iraqis.
That may be why a Marine commander in Iraq on Friday reportedly told his troops to take down the American flag, which might inflame Iraqi resistance. And a final tactic in the psychological battle plan, drum in the fact that Iraqi commanders who commit war crimes will be held, quote, personally responsible.
War crimes will be prosecuted. War criminals will be punished.
Those who carry out such orders will be found and will be punished.
The message is getting to Iraq on leaflets, by radio, satellite television, and on the internet.
How important is it that the Iraqis get this message?
It's absolutely critical. I think that the question is going to be, the closer you get to the inner circle, if you will, of Saddam Hussein, will they get it, and will they get it in time?
Overwhelming force, coupled with more subtle but powerful psychology. War planners hope the combination will cause many more to surrender, even cause Baghdad to fall before U.S. ground troops even arrive.
Now, for a look at how one special community is reacting to all of this, let's go back to my colleague, Stone Phillips. Stone?
Thanks, Tom. No one questions that there are far more urgent matters in the world this weekend than the Academy Awards. Hollywood faces a very delicate task tomorrow, how to honor Oscar's glitzy tradition while recognizing the unease that grips the nation now that its military men and women are risking their lives overseas. Can tomorrow night's ceremony celebrate the best of Hollywood and still show respect for the best of America? Here's Maria Shriver.
Oscars are big business in Hollywood. They're a multi-million-dollar enterprise, and anything that threatens them is striking a blow at the heart of this community. From hotels to restaurants to hairdressers to limousine services, Los Angeles counts on the Oscars to make their year. It's estimated that more than $61 million in goods and services are pumped into this local economy. Just a few days ago, this was a town worried that the Academy Awards would be canceled. Gil Cates produces the Oscar telecast.
We're all feeling the same kind of anxiety. We're all feeling the same kind of what's happening in the news, and that will be reflected in the show.
The red carpet will stay rolled up. The screaming fans will be gone, and the parties are more subdued. But the glamour business is thriving. Floral designer Eric Buderbaugh.
And we know that Julia Roberts loves white. We know Renee Zellweger loves soft colors.
Celebrity hairstylist Nick Chavez.
You better look good and let nobody know you're sweating or you're feeling bad.
And seamstress Laura Vernick will be working all night dressing down the stars. Describe the look this year compared to past years.
More conservative, not so bright colors.
Oscar night is the Super Bowl of fashion, but without the red carpet, out goes millions in free advertising. What does that mean to designers if they don't get that red carpet photo?
We will marshal on just like the rest of the world and other businesses.
Veteran red carpet disher Joan Rivers is also adjusting.
Of course, you'll be asking them more serious questions. You're not going to say, what are you wearing? You're going to say, what do you think about the war? And what are you wearing?
And late word tonight, anti-war protesters are threatening to shut down the Oscars. So far, the show remains on track. The other big unknown? Will the stars make political statements of their own?
You don't give up your citizenship when you enter the doors of the Oscar ceremony. You know, we live in a free society.
Last year, 41 million Americans watched the Academy Awards. This year, Oscar observers are speculating that number could go much higher. Traditionally, in times of war, people look to the entertainment industry for a respite. Nothing would make Oscar happier.
This year, opening those envelopes won't have quite the same drama. While each day of war is filled with uncertainty, what we do know for certain is that it will have a huge impact on the U.S. economy. John Larson is back now on what that might mean for you.
Look closely at this picture. While the world nervously watched the bombing in Baghdad Friday, the box on the right showed the stock market confidently roaring upward. shooting toward its best week in more than 20 years. And despite the fires burning in Iraqi oil fields, oil prices dropped, their biggest weekly drop since the first Gulf War. That could bring down those frighteningly high prices at the pumps. Does all this mean good news for the economy? CNBC anchor Ron Insana.
If the war ends quickly and there are no long-term adverse consequences, then it seems businessmen might be more inclined to invest in new projects because that uncertainty has gone away. And that in turn means they're more likely to hire people, and that would help the unemployment rate come down.
All of which would mean more money in the economy.
More money, higher incomes for individuals, a lower unemployment rate. You get a lot of reasonably good developments that could come from a very swift conclusion to the war.
But a rebound may still be a long time coming, especially for the airlines. The war plus fear of a terrorist reprisal pushed 2 airlines Friday into bankruptcy and forced others to announce more than 10,000 layoffs and cut hundreds of flights.
We're not going to be here if we don't take some pretty stringent action. And I think we're doing, and the others are, doing all that they can to kind of stay afloat.
And like the airlines, there are many other businesses not yet feeling Wall Street's confidence. Bob Taylor is president and co-owner of Taylor Guitars in San Diego. An already stalled economy, along with war fears, has flattened sales in his business.
Oil prices, gas prices can affect people's ability to purchase guitars because, again, it's a luxury item. If I'm spending my monthly budget on food, gas, heating oil, keeping warm through the winter, I can put off that $1,000, $2,000 purchase on a guitar.
Businesses may already know what the market's rise isn't telling you, that despite the record rebound, changes in consumer confidence and corporate spending take time. It could take months, even years, for this economy to heal.
The Wall Street Journal recently did a survey of American CEOs and asked them, once this war is over, will you spend a great deal more on new plants or new equipment? And they said no. So it's uncertain as to whether or not we'll see a full-scale positive response to a short and successful war.
In other words, they may have learned now how to be lean, and they don't want to give that up too quickly.
Yeah, lean's a tough place to get away from when you have an environment that's been as unforgiving as the one we've seen in the last 3 years.
Some tough questions for Congress on the budget as well. Back to you, Tom.
Thanks very much, Stone Phillips, tonight. Joining us now is Time Magazine's Jim Lacey, who was with the 101st when that grenade attack happened. 2 grenades were rolled into a tent. Mr. Lacey, I presume you know by now that there's been an arrest made in this case.
Yes, Tom. There's been one American soldier. He is being held in custody. He was found in a bunker. He was injured presumably by his own attack, and we're not allowed to give out much information about him because he was wounded, and the ground rules here say we cannot divulge name until such time as his family's been notified. So,
do they have any idea? Do they have any idea about motivation?
Yes, they do. He has been acting strange for a while, and they had made a decision to leave him in the stay-behind party when the unit moved forward into Iraq. We do know that he has voiced some displeasure around the unit and the organization in the past few days, and people have been keeping an eye on him. But obviously, he got away with this.
I know that you have to choose your words carefully here, Jim, because you're operating in a very sensitive situation. But now take us back to the attack again. What, 2 grenades were rolled into the tent?
It seems now that 3 grenades were thrown. He had a total of 4. He threw 3 of them. One was a dud, fizzled out. It did light a small fire. The other 2 went off, and they were thrown into 2 separate tents. And right now I'm told that there are 12 soldiers injured, and 6 of them seriously. I do not believe there was a life-threatening wound at this time.
All right, thanks very much, Jim Lacey. I know it's been a long, difficult night for you, but we appreciate the update on that situation. A member of the 101st Airborne now has been arrested in that grenade attack that did, as you heard Mr. Lacey describe for us, injure several of what had been his comrades in arms. NBC's Kelly O'Donnell is in Goddard. That's the headquarters for the U.S. Central Military Command, where General Tommy Franks is directing this war. Kelly?
Good evening, Tom. We are told not to expect to see much more of General Tommy Franks at the briefing room in the days to come. He made his first appearance before cameras and before the world media today, but I'm told that he simply does not enjoy the personality demands of being a combatant commander. And those close to him also say he believes the parents and spouses of those in the field working on this mission would prefer that he be in the war room, not the briefing room. So expect to see much more of a one-star general, Vince Brooks, who shared the podium with General Tommy Franks today. We don't know when the next briefing will be scheduled, but we are not likely to see Tommy Franks again anytime soon. Tom?
Thanks very much, NBC's Kelly O'Donnell. Again, it's early Sunday morning in Doha, Qatar. Sometimes it's easy to forget that every reported fatality and casualty in a war represents a loved one, usually a young person, a circle of friends and family who love them very much. Those loved ones shared one of their own to help the war effort. Now they must find they have to share their grief with the country. Here's Keith Morrison.
There is a sad, familiar procedure to this now. The first casualties. And they are, nobody intends it, of course, a media thing. A competitive public intrusion on private grief. When word emerged that a helicopter had crashed near the Kuwait-Iraq border and that 8 British and 4 American soldiers had been killed, a gaggle of reporters and their paraphernalia pulled up at the gates of Camp Pendleton in California, waiting for names, pictures, someone to say something, anything. It fell to a major named Curtis Hill, who said what he could. What do you say?
We are grateful for your sacrifice and the sacrifice your loved ones have made.
So they have sacrificed, and everybody understood that.
He was just a pilot that was doing his job.
In Chicago, the family of Ryan Beaupre faced the cameras and the microphones.
I don't think he was ever afraid of anything.
How would this first casualty want to be remembered?
Very quietly. He would probably have a heart attack right now if he knew we were doing this.
Then there was Jay Aubin, also on that helicopter. Jay grew up in Maine and joined the military there because college would be too expensive for him. His mother, Nancy Chamberlain, like a lot of us, had been drawn to the war on TV. Anxiety will do that.
And I saw that a helicopter had crashed. Something just told me that this was he.
She picked up the phone and called her daughter-in-law, Jay's wife, but she didn't answer. It was someone else.
A Marine captain answered the phone. I knew right then and there what had happened.
Public grief. How many mothers are like Melissa Derbyshire, who needed to call a press conference about her son, Brian Kennedy?
I was really lucky to know my Brian for so long. 25 years.
They know there's a risk, of course, but still, when a father finds out his son is dead.
I want President Bush to get a good look at this. Real good look here. This is the only son I had. Only son.
Kendall Watersbay was his only son, and Kendall had a son himself.
I'm gonna just miss all of it.
And what's to become of him, young Kenneth, now that he has no dad? There have been more deaths now in accidents and combat, more families ripped up, more mothers heading into a long tunnel of grief. Though, knock wood, casualties have been lower than some have been warning. The British have so far suffered more deaths than we. And the Iraqi side? There's no knowing even how many, or who, or how their families are coping. But we know these first few, this first mournful accounting of the dead, and understand a little better the cost.
And however large or small the war, the cost is always high. That's all for this edition of Dateline. You can get the latest on this ever-changing story with continuing coverage on MSNBC, on cable, and on the internet on MSNBC.com. Tomorrow morning, a special edition of Today, starting at 8 with Matt Lauer in Kuwait, Katie Couric here at home, followed by a special 2-hour edition of Meet the Press with special guest Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld. Of course, I'll be back on the air anytime the news warrants our special attention. For now, I'm Tom Brokaw on behalf of Stone Phillips and all of us at NBC News. We wish you good evening.